So I'm really excited to be sharing with you all the history side of the old Santa Fe Trail building. I first came to this building in 2017, and I worked in the collections section, having just finished my bachelor's in art history. And I had the pleasure of giving in-person tours a few times during 2017 prior to our rehabilitation project. So I'm really excited to be revisiting the old Santa Fe Trail with you all today virtually and walking through its history. And then I'll hand it over to Charles to talk through the rehabilitation process. So to give a context of the old Santa Fe Trail building, I'd like to start off by talking about the overall architecture of the National Park Service, and that is the rustic style, which really is what makes our iconic National Park Service buildings. And this really comes through the theory of rustic architecture that was designed by Thomas Vint and Herbert Meyer right at the beginning of the National Park Service in 1916, and then leading up to 1940 prior to World War II. And that puts the National Park Service right at the end of the rustic era, so-called, in the National Park Service. And that really will bring us into talking some more about the old Santa Fe Trail building. But really the theory of the rustic style is to, rather than making an obtrusive architectural imprint on federal public lands in America's national parks, the idea was to make architecture the extension of the landscape. And with Thomas Vint and Herbert Meyer being side by side a landscape architect and architect, they were able to combine philosophies and backgrounds of these two fields into what makes the National Park Service iconic architecture. So this is achieved by using what Vint calls a horizontal key, and also by using materials derived from the resources that they're built upon. So oftentimes there will be masonry stone from the associated site, as well as timbers that are able to convey a sense of continuity that makes the building seem as though it's growing from the landscape. And as Vint had said, buildings in federal lands and national parks were not ideal, but if you're going to make a building, you better make it a good one. So regionally in the Southwest, that applies to the theories and the early historic preservation that's really happening through the restoration or rehabilitation of mission churches, which were really seen as the icons of the Southwest and really seen as places that they would want to preserve to enrich cultural heritage and enrich American interpretation and tourism throughout this whole region. So this is really what brings a lot of architects to be introduced to both regional materials and regional techniques, including working with adobes and lime plasters and the types of building construction that was really part of the Southwestern vernacular. So this really creates a regional rustic and regional identity, and this goes also to what is the early formation of the Spanish Pueblo Revival, and where John Gaumim he gets his start with working on these churches, and so do a lot of the folks that end up working with the National Park Service. So it really is, it's teaching them the techniques as well as the forms that will influence newer designs, such as the old Santa Fe Trail building. Now, this is really happening opposite the international style of architecture and the rise of modernism in the 1930s, with further and higher availability of different materials to enhance building technology. There was more of a push to internationalize architectural styles and make different places around the world be more uniform through modernity. And the National Park Service actually is working in sort of an opposite spirit of regionalism, as is a lot of the architecture in Santa Fe. Again, utilizing regional styles and regional materials to continue to convey a sense of organic nature in the architecture, as opposed to a sense of modernity and of plasticity. So the old Santa Fe Trail building is actually located right on the southeast side of Santa Fe, near Museum Hill, as many of us would know, and what Santa Fe is designated as the Historic Review District. This places the building very close also to John Gum Meem's office, allowing Meem to be somewhat involved in the construction process, offering thoughts now and then about the old Santa Fe Trail building, and working with the architect to help shape the building in a more complementary way to the landscape. So the design, again, is chosen to be the Spanish Pueblo Revival style, also known as the Santa Fe style. And the idea of choosing this style for the National Park Service's first regional headquarters office building built by the CCC is to really convey a sense of place and a sense of connection to the region itself, to better orient the staff to the resources in which the region that they're working with. So this is really an intentional decision, not only to suit the Santa Fe style, but also to suit the mission goals of the National Park Service. So this is adopted by architect Cecil Doty, who is one of the less known names in National Park Service history, but I would say he's severely undercredited because a lot of his work has really shaped the built environment of the National Park Service. And the old Santa Fe Trail building was really his first project after being a CCC draftsman. So he takes what he's learned from Thomas Vint and he is able to apply it to the Santa Fe building here. And this is really his last time to execute a rustic project before the Second World War. And prior to World War II, he went on to design over 100 National Park Service visitor centers and headquarters throughout the country. So this was really his last major project in the rustic style. So this building would have not have been possible without the Civilian Conservation Corps, which was comprised of several young men from the Santa Fe area. And this not only provided some relief during the Depression, allowing for people to be employed by the WPA and to also gain skills in regional construction, as well as carpentry, masonry, and all other types of practical technical skills for construction and architecture. And this also allowed for a continuity of heritage and tradition. At the time, there was a decision in a lot of Santa Fe's buildings to use alternate materials rather than using adobe and wood forms to create the traditional vernacular. There was a choice to use some materials such as fired clay brick rather than adobe brick. So this is really the National Park Service's attempt to, again, preserve the regional tradition as well as convey the most authentic forms through the materials as well as the design. And this really continues through the interior with what are really movable elements, including desks and different wood element accents throughout the building. This also included architectural elements, which did require very precise carpentry skills. And these were executed through trainings by carpenters and skilled craftsmen in the Santa Fe area. So allowing those skills to really translate throughout the community. And also creating a full immersion experience, really, if you're working in the building and you're surrounded by regional styles and materials, it does really start to ground you into the area. And that was the whole idea there. And this goes beyond the furnishings, but also into the light fixtures as well as the art, with light fixtures being mostly tin structures crafted by local craftsman Eddie Delgado. And art was commissioned through the Federal Art Project. So again, providing economic relief to the area by commissioning weavings from regional tribes, Pueblo pottery, and also local paintings from Santa Fe, which some are still on display in the building today, and some are preserved in collections because they're sensitive items. And this really continues throughout the building and really works, all of these elements really work together to create a full sense, again, of immersion and uniformity throughout the building. So walking through the building, so to speak, I'd like to start in the courtyard, which is really the heart of the building. It's really surrounding the entire building with the two-story corridor anchoring the interior outdoor space. And with all of the buildings wrapping around as it would be in a traditional Spanish Colonial complex. So throughout this area, there are flagstone walkways which continue into the interior spaces, creating a sense of continuity through that way, as well as wooden windows and dados that continue throughout this whole area. And the courtyard is also accented by regional plantings, including roses, cottonwood, juniper, and pinon, which really, again, add that sense of movement and further the organic expression of this building. Structural wood elements, including carved corbels and peeled Vigo log beams, were implemented by being purchased from the U.S. Forest Service in Santa Fe for only 5 cents per foot. And these are continued throughout the building, and the Vigos are structural. So moving from the exterior to the interior, there really is a sense of mass when you're really moving through this building. And the walls are also extremely thick, which provide also function, but beautiful curves and forms as well. And the koi pond is right in there as well, with a cottonwood tree. There are also lots of exterior living spaces with the exterior kivas and smaller courtyards, which allow for the staff to, again, have an interior and exterior space to work in. And these courtyards have decorative and functional wood gates, which provide privacy as well as allowing for an easier circulation. And here's a photo of the tin light fixtures that can be found throughout, as well as the bancos, which provide built-in seating. So the building has really had few changes made throughout its existence. It's really been preserved well to its original construction, with very few changes taking place after 1940. Being completed in 1939, a lot of these changes were pretty close to the completion, with the greenhouse being added in 1940 and replaced in the 60s with the aluminum or steel frame greenhouse, as well as several mechanical and utilitarian sort of replacements in that time. And it is a National Historic Landmark on the National Register of Historic Places, which awards it the highest level of documentation to the National Register. And it is known for being significant under criterion A and C for its association with the rustic period of National Park Service planning and design, as well as an exemplary example of the Spanish Pueblo Revival style. And it really is the largest adobe office building in the United States and the only office building designed and built for the National Park Service by the CCC. And that is where I'll leave it off to Charles, where he'll talk about the rehabilitation efforts that have taken place. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Flynn. Thank you very much. So yeah, we'll welcome Charles now to do his presentation. Thanks so much, Charles.
Yes, thank you again, Melanie and Flynn, for your presentation. It's quite an honor to speak to you all today about this building and about the past few years where we've rehabilitated it. I'll go ahead and switch over to my other screen here and get on with the show. Well, I'd like to start off with just a little brief index here of what we're going to talk about. I'm going to go over planning and exploration that was conducted, the mock-ups that we had planned for, and also as we get into construction, what we discovered throughout, both known and unknown, some of the treatment that we did on the historic fabric throughout the project, seismic treatment of the building, of course, and then a brief discussion of some other projects that were ongoing and continue on right now. And then always we'll wrap it up with some lessons learned and a Q&A. So the planning on this building rehabilitation had started in 2010, though there were some earlier attempts to get funding for the stucco repair, and really didn't get started, like I said, until 2010, and we concluded in 2016. First, we reached out to Anderson Hallis Architects of Golden, Colorado, and I ended up with Weiss, Janney, Elstron Associates, engineers out of California, and concluded obviously with the plans and specifications and went out for bid. The project scope had included re-roofing, replacing all the cementitious plaster on the building, reworking some of the site drainage, and then working on some of the wood elements that we knew that needed to be replaced through cyclic replacement project, or just as a what we discovered would be succumb to rot or pests. The roof was in much need of a replacement. The asphalt built-up roof that was on the building was installed in the early 90s. We did put a patch on the second-story roof in the form of a single-ply membrane, as you see in the right-hand slide, over the existing built-up roof. The stucco or exterior plaster itself was in much need of replacement. As you see, we had applied a synthetic stucco to the top parapet caps as a Band-Aid to buy us some life until we could achieve this larger project. And our maintenance staff was also doing repairs around viga ends, and as well as caulking some of the cracking that was occurring in the building. As Flynn mentioned, this is a National Historic Landmark, so we had to be sensitive to how we treated the vegetation in and around the building, as it's also wanted to change some of the issues that we had with some of the drainage, how some of the safety from the drainage that's coming off the building by changing the way our splash dissipators worked, adding vegetated swell, improving drainage, of course, and adding some catch basements. Woodwork, we cyclically replace exterior viga ends, and it was time again. We had a campaign back in 2003 rather, where we'd replaced some of them, and assumed that all of them had replaced over time, and this would just be another chance to improve those exterior elements. All the canales were also in need of replacement and would be replaced with this project. Any wood elements on the exterior that we encountered that were in need of replacement would also be dealt with as well. And we would be repairing the exterior wood gates that are located throughout the complex. Now, seismic improvements, this came about, there was cyclic funding that happened to be made available to us in 2012, and we took full advantage of that and incorporated that into our building. WJE is a leading engineering firm in California, as I mentioned before, and they have dealt with many adobe churches in California, which is obviously a higher seismic zone than we are, and helped us out greatly in this aspect. We also dealt with asbestos that was found in the cement plaster stucco exterior, and some lead that was in the exterior wood elements as well. Both A&E firms that we'd used did destructive and non-destructive testing. You can see here where we removed small sections and also did borings throughout all the walls on the exterior to verify basic composition of the plaster, how many thicknesses we had anticipated removing. Also anticipated moisture from leaks, and the actual condition of the adobe below. In most cases, we found it to be in very good condition. And even in the slide on the right, you can see that the mud plaster was still pretty much intact. And this was basis, like I said, for 99% or 95% of the building itself. Now, as you can see, over the years, they've not just stucco had been added to the building. Many times, many layers would have been added, including large sections of cement plaster to fill in voids. Non-destructive, or well, still destructive. We did a compaction test in the parking lot to determine the soil strength, soil bearing for the project. We did roof corings throughout each roof section to verify the number of layers of built-up roof in addition to the layers of the insulation below. Non-destructive, we did resistance tests on the wood elements, all vigas, all canales throughout the building. And then we also attempted to use ground penetrating radar. Unfortunately, the number of layers of lath and plaster on the building did not allow us to reveal any information other than what we already found out through destructive tests. Now, once we got into construction, we required the contractor to make several wall mock-ups, this being the one that we accepted, showing the finish around vigas, the parapets, the roof composition, and you can see at the bottom of the photograph. From there, we moved on to on-site wall mock-ups, and once that was accepted, we moved on to removing the exterior stucco. Now, keep in mind that though the original project actually called out that we would be removing all the exterior stucco in its entirety, through discussions with the New Mexico State Historic Preservation Office, we came to the compromise that we would leave some of the original plaster in place. And it was determined that all the exterior plaster that was under the portals on the interior courtyard and also the very front facade of the building did in fact have just a single layer of stucco, three-coat system, and some subsequent layers of paint. And so therefore, we would keep those intact. Here again, we can see some of the things that we found was interesting, at least to me, was that how they filled out some of the headers so that the stucco wouldn't have any kind of indentation. And then also on this lower right photograph, how they stitched the site walls into the building. So about every fourth course of adobe block was actually stitched, like I said, crossed into the building, even though that right now they've cracked because of wall movement between the two. Other areas we found, again, more cemented infilled areas where they had lost adobe. The way they infilled with block and brick. We also found that the building had not been constructed to the original plans, and a lot of the wood beams or bond beams that should have been throughout the building underneath each one of the vigas was not there, was not present, though they did have leveling blocks occasional to make the roof level. The photograph on the right is a depiction of a lot of the concrete that was added to the building. And when I say concrete, I mean cementitious plaster, though there are concrete blocks that were found in subsequent campaigns. Primarily in the front facade where the buttress on the right, it was rumored that many years ago when they did removal of stucco and did leak repairs, that there was a man-sized void within the wall. And we wondered if we would find any of that. We actually didn't. What we did find was that in that front facade buttress, they did replace most of it with concrete masonry units. So we did not remove that. We basically cleaned it up and replastered over it. On the right is an addition that was done in the late 70s or early 80s, which was a porch over one of the south-facing doorways where they used lightweight block to create the parapets and just butted it up against the original stucco. This is also the front buttress on the right-hand side where they used concrete and rebar to shore up the overhang. And then we found also abandoned electrical conduit as well in several cases. Excuse me. We also found not a lot, but definitely several areas that had termite damage. And these were not subterranean termites. These were ones that came in through the areas around the canales in times of wet seasons, basically followed the moisture down to the wood, and there were no evidence of current activity. A couple other things that we knew we would find were vigas that had not protruded through the plaster and had been cut back. We also did find some that were cut back as cleanly, maybe just they let the rotted end fall off and they plastered over it. A couple other areas we found where the footing was primarily consisted of cut stone and was plastered over. Several areas, as you'll note in the front of the building, where the river rock protrudes out and is allowed to be seen. Well, the previous campaigns of stucco had actually covered up some of these stones. And so we were able to re-expose those and shows the natural beauty of this building design. We did have a couple of vigas that had rotted back all the way past the full bearing strength. And as you can see here on the photo on the right, the white is evidence of the actual interior plaster. We were able to use stainless steel rods and wood consolidation, as well as Dutchman repairs to those two vigas, and bring them back to their full bearing strength without having to replace an interior viga. Now, in a couple other areas, we also did find where they had removed adobes wholesale and replaced them with block. And we did find evidence in our drawing files of this. It was a 1961 repair campaign in Restucco, where they had just called out this as being block. So we didn't know if it was what it consists of until now. It was actually concrete masonry units. Apparently where they had lost an entire section of the wall on the west side of the building. The photo on the right here is also an indication of where they had done a repair. You can see the difference in color around the parapet and canaling. Also, you can see that the three different layers at different times that were added on top of the building. This one, though it's kind of hard to tell what we're looking at here on the left, was here, center right is the structural viga. And then the void here, left center, is actually where they had inserted a fake viga end. They didn't quite match up the two, which is not the normal procedure. And then the photo here on the right is also showing oakum that was used around a lot of the viga ends as a transition from the plaster to wood. This is, again, the porch I referred to earlier, showing some of the construction materials and construction techniques. Not necessarily the best, but we were able to repair this and keep the majority of it in place and give us a good product in the end. Now, again, I said earlier that the assumption going into this project was that all the viga ends had been replaced at some time in the 80-year history of the building. It was not the case. We did actually find two, and these are the two, and we did not replace them. As you can see, the Dutchman repair here on the right-hand side and the one here on the left-hand side, they remarkably survived being so close to canaling. It's quite incredible. And all the presence of potential moisture between the two. And that one, we just did wood consolidation and left it in place. Here's some other wood Dutchman repairs, some repair to one of our courtyard gates, where he's stripping off the NPS brown paint. And all the wood elements in this building, we are going back to a linseed oil, raw and unfiltered treatment rather than paint. And so that's one of the ongoing projects that are still happening. The photograph here on the left is the copper flashing that was embedded into the parapet walls on the majority of the project. We did not remove that in most cases and left it in place because it would require us to remove adobe block and further damage the parapet walls. So only where necessary do we remove them. One of the cases is where we were actually seeing rot on the wood structure beneath the parapet, where we did replace both the wood and adobes. Now, we gave the contractor an estimate of how many adobes that he would have to provide in this project. And that was based on 12% of the number of adobes assumed that had been used in the building. And that number was about 34,000 adobes that would be needed. So over the course of the construction, the contractor had the adobes made up and had them delivered as needed. Here on the left is the metal windows in the basement. Instead of replacing those, we did go in and have those, the lead paint removed and restored those as well. The picture on the right here shows new adobes being stitched into the parapet wall. And here's some reconstruction of some of the parapets around canales, and also, again, a good section of mud coat that remained on the building. Now, the dirt that was taken off the building, any dirt or from the mud coat or from adobes, we actually reused that in the process and reconstituted it and put it back on the building in the form of the new mud coats. I talked about preserving the interior or the exterior plaster on the interior of the portals. This is an image showing where they're making the transition between the two. The photograph here on the right is a picture of one of the wood elements, and it kind of gives us an idea of how we lost some of the characteristics over time. You can kind of see the multiple layers of stucco that had covered up and slowly enveloped the wood. So it was kind of nice to bring these back to some of the original photographs based on the original design. The same with the parapets. We lost a lot of the characteristics of the stepping of the parapets, undulations of the walls by the multiple layers of stucco that had been added onto the building over the years. As we removed portions of the building stucco, we could see that these steps had been actually filled in with plaster, and therefore were no longer easily recognizable on the exterior. And then, we also removed some of the non-historic plaster around the chimneys and replaced that also with the traditional mud mortar. Here's some of the lintels that we took out. Some we were able to save, again, by wood consolidation or Dutchman's. Some we were not able to save. It lost most of their structural ability, and this was very few. I mean, we were probably talking maybe a dozen lintels at best that we actually had to replace. Here's a photograph of the new copper line canale getting ready to go in. We did have a couple of instances where the doors were so out of square that we required the contractor to do a little bit of it in interior work and interior plaster. So you have the before and after as we had them square up that door. This helped prevent pests from entering the door and also gives longevity to the door itself. Some of the seismic work that was done, one of those things that was unknown to us coming into this project is exactly how the framing between the decking on top of the vigas and the roof decking itself. We knew that the pitch was built in on top of the roof as in a separate structure, but we didn't know exactly how the two were joined. They weren't joined very well. You can see it was just a lot of small blocking and propping up of like pony walls between the two structures. So we went in and did a lot of reinforcing of that, in addition to the seismic work that was called out, which was anchoring the exterior walls that did not have vigas protruding through them to the deck diaphragm by means of straps and anchors. Now, this meant that in the case of an earthquake, a wall that had vigas protruding through it had the resistance of the vigas and would work against the roof diaphragm in resistance and therefore would not collapse. But unrestrained walls that did not have vigas protruding through them would collapse because they would be unhinged on the top of the wall. So this was the fix, was to anchor those walls to the roof diaphragm. In the case of the annex, where we had an unhinged wall meeting up against a hinged wall or anchored wall, so we had some interesting details that were concealed within inside of the adobe parapets. Other things that went on during the near year and a half construction period, so we did have a new heating project that went in, replacing all the heating lines throughout the building. And then our maintenance staff was also doing painting, oiling the wood elements throughout. We've also been doing some carpeting, asbestos removal. And we also took the opportunity to redo our pond and remove the cottonwood that had been there and predated the building. Unfortunately, it was leaning over and causing the pond to crack, and also had a potential of falling on the building at some point. So that was replaced with a new cottonwood. And unfortunately, our spillway on the koi pond had broke, but on further examination, it was time for it to be reconstructed. The drawing up here in the upper right is actual from the original drawings, and this is what we went back with. We did find that it had probably 5 layers of plaster applied over the old one and had lost a lot of its characteristics, a lot of the reliefs that it contained. We also did include, as a separate project, replacement of the plaster stucco on the site walls that were unconnected to the building. And we talked about the amount of adobes that we anticipated going into this was about 34,000 additional block. Well, the contractor did not need all those. So the building was in much better shape than when we much had anticipated. But when we got into the site walls, we actually did use all the adobe bricks that were created for the building, and in addition to some more, actually a couple thousand more, as you can see from this lower photograph of one of the site walls. It's pretty well degraded. Other items we did add, we removed the air conditioning off the first floor and replaced it with mini splits. We've got a lighting project that will be ongoing here as well. Lesson learned. Regardless of what the contractor thinks he has in place for weather protection, the weather will always throw something different at us. So their initial attempts to protect the building from weather, unfortunately, met with one of the coldest, wettest, windiest winters we'd had in some time, and led them to change their plans and go to a superstructure, which you may have seen from the street if you're passing the building a year or so ago, thinking that why are we adding this building metal structure on top of the building? Well, we're not. We were just protecting it. As you can see from one of the photograph here on the right, they were actually diverted the water off the second story roof over into the courtyard and away from the work below. Here you can see some of the weights that were required to keep that structure in place. And the contractor assured us that they wouldn't damage our courtyard, and it has recovered within the year since. The picture on the right, it was just their attempt at first to provide structure that the wind soon destroyed. Other things that occurred, which sometimes have no control over, when they were removing the multi-layers of plaster from the exterior, a lot of those were anchored to the window frames, and therefore we did have some damage that occurred around the windows. And obviously the contractor did come in and make those repairs as well. We did some instances of water intrusion into the walls, and obviously those have been replaced as well. And everybody always asks, what happened to the koi? Well, we moved them into the tub, into the garage, and that's where they lived throughout construction, and they were quite happy. So our finished product, a couple of photographs here showing what it looks like now. The new Viga ends. Now, we didn't replace all the Viga ends in entirety. We did go through and leave the ones that were still in good condition and were not giving us any problems. Though again, we did replace all the cannolis. I always enjoyed it, especially this color and this finish, which was one of those discoveries that we had made in removing the material off of the building. We found that a lot of the original plaster was not sanded, but smooth finish, and the color was much darker than we had initially anticipated. I kind of like it. It looks like a chocolate cake there on the right. Other things that we found was that the shape of the arch on the entranceway was not asymmetrical, it was asymmetrical, but recent campaigns had made it symmetrical, and so we also had changed that back to more original design. Here's the new roof system, some of the conduit on the second story for the mini splits. This is a modified bitumen roof, and also with the advanced coating on the metal and canales. Here's the interior, one of the interior court light well courtyards. The front facade from the public parking area, which is one of my favorites. All the stair stepping and light and shadows from all the different levels and vigas and canales. Once we remove the brown paint off of the wood elements, I always thought the clavos on that gate were wood, but they were obviously metal. And so it's kind of nice to see some of the original artwork refreshed again. There's some of the other areas, some of the new dissipators, regrading that occurred to get water away from the building. Also regraded the small courtyard in the south side next to what used to be the lunchroom. We got our sunroom, greenhouse over here in the upper right, and then the back side that of the walls and annex that face the Arroyo. Some other photos of a couple of canales that we extended out to get them further away from walls. Some of the wood now that have been treated with linseed oil, and also showing now the furnishings that are back in the building, and some of the paintings, as well as the pottery collection and the new front facade. Our entrance sign, there's our new cottonwood and koi pond. Okay, time for question and answers.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks so much, Charles. That it was fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're lucky to have you actually having so much knowledge of the building and what was done over the years to actually do this presentation. So we're really grateful that you provided us with all that info. We do have a few questions that popped up along the way. Someone had asked about the seismic improvements. I think you actually did address what was done there. What can this building handle now? Like what level of earthquake could hit the building and it would sustain the structure as it is?
Well, early on, when we were doing the research and also working with the engineers, we felt that it wouldn't be possible to preserve the building in its entirety through what any means, just because of the nature of adobe construction. So the efforts that were put in place were primarily safety efforts. It would keep the building or keep the roofs from collapsing, and therefore giving occupants time to exit the building in case of an earthquake.
Okay, right. Okay, so we have another one. Well, we have a bunch popping in here now.
Sure.
Why was there a change of architects midstream in the project?
It had to do with the seismic. Anderson Hellis had proposed a much more aggressive retrofit, which would have required removal of interior plaster in about 25% of every room. So we had done an internal review, and James Mason, Dr. James Mason, our structural engineer, felt that this was too invasive and would have a negative effect on not only the building and construction, but also a negative effect in the seismic event.
Okay. Okay. What was the estimated cost of the whole project?
So the initial estimated cost was about $4 million, and we pretty much hit that target. By the time we added the site walls and some of the other elements, we were for 5.2. So over, but again, we had not anticipated initially redoing the site walls, but it just seemed to make sense. People could drive by and say, oh, they spent, $4 million on this building, and yet the site walls don't match, and they're still in the same condition that they were previously. So it just made sense to add them back in.
How did you get the number of 12% for the adobe bricks needed? Is that a pretty standard?
It was a conservative estimate by the engineers. We have to give the contractor something. And so we thought, well, hopefully we won't need that many, and perhaps we will. And if we do need more, then we will modify the contract and have them make more.
So there were about 3 million used in the original building. Am I doing the math right? Or 300?
Flynn,
300,
I think it was in one of your slides. It was
240,000.
340. Yeah, I was doing the math totally wrong, adding extra zero in there. But that's still an incredible amount of adobe bricks. Okay, I have a few more questions. Is the intent to let exposed vigas to naturally patina, or are they going to be stained and oiled?
Well, they have already been stained and oiled, or they haven't been stained, but they've been oiled. And yes, they will naturally patina.
And then this is when I was talking to you about Flynn. I knew this would come up, but can the public visit the building? If so, what are the hours, or what do you anticipate maybe?
Well, right now, yeah, sorry, Flynn. Right now, we aren't open to the public, obviously due to health concerns, and it's unlikely at this time that we can even give you a projected date as to when we'll be reopening to public visits. About the 5 years prior, it was visits by appointment only, and we would schedule tours on a limited basis. So it's not technically open to the public even then, but except by, like I said, scheduled tours.
So just kind of wait and see. Everybody.
Yeah, we just have to wait and see. And then we still, we're about 75% through asbestos removal in the interior tiles and recarpeting and repainting on the interior as well.
Oh, wow.
So we try to take full advantage of everybody telecommuting
Yeah.
to work on the building.
So someone says, is the basement now accessible and usable?
Yes. Yeah, we, as far as I know, it's always been usable. So.
Okay, another question about the tour. It's unclear if the original intent was to have mud plaster finish, or was the level coating in anticipation of cement stucco?
Yeah, this building had never had the traditional mud finish. The mud leveling coat had always been applied, and cement stucco had always been in the design from the get-go.
I'm going to stop the questions after these. I will go through a few more because, of course, there's a few more that popped up that are about tours, everybody wanting to visit. let's see, there was one more. Why is the beam above the main entrance second story window different in length?
That's part of the local vernacular in respect to asymmetry, that it was meant to look as if this building had grown over a period of time, and things weren't always were done in a handcrafted way, just so that there's a lot of asymmetry in the wood elements and interplanes with the stucco. Flynn, you might want to add to that.
Yes, that was a intentional decision. Throughout the building, there are several asymmetrical elements, from what Charles had shown earlier with the undulating parapets, as well as the entry to the courtyard over there, with the lintels being longer on one side than the other. And that is to create a further sense of movement and of an organic nature rather than a static nature.
Thank you.
So was the building originally mud plaster on the exterior?
No, again, there was only a mud leveling coat that was placed over. Cementitious plaster was used in the first campaign in the 30s until today.
Okay, what year are the windows from, and how did you repair them?
So the windows are original. They're original to the 30s. They were built on site in addition to the furnishings of the building. Matter of fact, though they had called out, I believe we have 7 different window sizes, you'll find that they're not manufactured. I mean, they vary. I'm in a screen repair replacement project right now for the building. We have storm windows that we take off during the summertime and put screens on, and then in the fall we take the screens off and put on storm windows. Again, we've got single pane glass, and each storm window and each screen is labeled for that particular place. That's the only place it fits. And so yes, and they are double hung. They are quite well made, though irregular. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Good. And then I think just 2 more, and then we'll start to wrap it up. But how did you apply the linseed oil mixed with paint, e.g. paint thinner ?
Yes, we did a 50% or 1-to-1 ratio with turpentine and linseed oil.
This one's a very long question. I'll just read Elizabeth's, a little bit of commentary, I think, too. Regarding my impression of the building's beauty, I'm intrigued to see the importance of asymmetry, as well as noting the different levels in all sorts of areas, while still retaining a sense of cohesiveness. Mr. Vickrey mentioned various shadows and the variety of stepped walls as being pleasing to him, and I agree. Perhaps the 400 million spent is a reminder of how valuable non-static aesthetic is. Historic preservation and the respect for our wonderful old buildings and styles should take note, I think. Thank you. She says, thank you very much to Ms. Larson and Mr. Vickrey for the presentation. That's from Elizabeth West, who's also with Old Santa Fe Association. So I think on that note, that might be a good way to finish it. Elizabeth, I think, stated it really nicely. Thank you both so much, and all the National Park Service people as our panelists in the background, as our backups there. We really appreciate this, and we also appreciate you guys so much so with our award that we're giving to you guys this year. So we hope to see you maybe sometime soon and present that in person. So thank you so much, Flynn, and thanks, Charles.
Thank you very much, Melanie.
Thank you all for attending. Have a nice evening. And we'll
Thank
see
you.
you soon.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.